we begin with a big move higher for Boeing. The stock are racing near all of those early losses as the FAA tells airlines the grounded 737 MAX plane could get recertified by mid-year. Moments ago, though, Boeing delaying its test flight of its newest plane, the 777X. Phil LeBeau, who never sleeps, is covering it all for us from Everett, Washington. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Courtney. The 777X test flight, the first flight of the 777X, didn't happen because far too windy today. They just were not having the optimal conditions. They're going to try again tomorrow. Let's talk about the 737 MAX story. As you mentioned, the big reversal in shares for Boeing happened midday after word got out that the head of the FAA, Steve Dickson, got on the phone with executives for the 3 U.S. airlines that have the 737 MAX, and he said, look, there is good progress being made by Boeing when it comes to taking care of all of the issues that need to be taken care of in order to recertify the MAX. He also said there is the potential that this plane could be ungrounded by the middle of the year, if not sooner, provided there are no surprises that come up, nothing that further delays the progress that he's seeing made. This is important for this reason, and this is why you see the stock moving higher. Steve Dickson has been reserved, cautious, somebody who has been very careful not to say anything that might be misinterpreted as too optimistic. And that is the reason why, when you take a look at shares of Boeing, investors believe perhaps there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to the 737 MAX. Now, let's be clear. It still has a number of hurdles that it has to clear. It has the recertification flight. It's got a number of other key moments that need to happen. But this is the first time that we've heard from the head of the FAA in a positive manner, speaks to the change at the top of Boeing and in the relationship between Boeing and the FAA. And we certainly have noticed that over the last couple of weeks.
So, Phil, of course, that's the big headline. Everybody's watching what happens here with this 737 MAX. What about the Dreamliner, though, and the changes that may be made with production there?
Right. Well, earlier today, there was a report that Boeing might be considering a reduction, a further reduction in 787 Dreamliner production. We talked with our sources. They say that, yes, Boeing is considering this. Right now, they build 14 787s per month. It's going down to 12 by the end of this year. That was a change that they announced in the third quarter that they were going to be making this change. Now they are considering a further reduction. Boeing, we asked them if they have a comment on this. They're saying, look, our standard comment is if we have to adjust our production in the future due to market conditions, we will do that. So no confirmation from the company at this point. Having said that, Courtney, if they go down to 11 or 10 per month, while no company likes to cut production, that is not a huge drop. That is not something that the market will look at and say, wow, that's not good news here. Far different situation than with the 737 MAX. But again, that's something that Boeing is considering, and that's because you look at the wide-body market and you look at how the softness might be developing a bit as you look out a few years. Not a huge drop-off. They're going to adjust production accordingly, and look, they could easily bring it back up maybe down the road if, in fact, they do a further rate reduction.
Thank you very much, Phil. A lot to get your hands around, but you do it for us all the time. Have a great weekend. All right, Guy, we saw this big reversal midday. Phil says it's because it's Stephen Dickson. He's been very conservative, but he came out and said, look, maybe we will recertify this mid-year. What does that mean for Boeing?
Right, there's potential. I mean, there's potential that the Giants will draft me in April. That's not going to happen either. I mean, and maybe it'll happen, but that's
I like those chances better.
I do as well. I think that's sort of the point.
And you've got good hands.
You know what? I did at one point, and I'm trying to get back.
And Eli's done, so.
We are done. But with that said, listen, I don't think that's the only catalyst for Boeing at this point. They report on Wednesday. I think you have to wait and hear what they say. Plus, Brian Sullivan mentions that a lot. Just because they get him back in the air doesn't mean people are going to be all that encouraged to get on him. And I think that's going to be a big problem as we get into the spring and summer. So although the stock had a decent day today on a lousy tape, I'm not ready to say all's clear in BA.
Anyone else think of conspiracy when we heard Trump talk about GDP? When he was in Davos, and maybe there was a phone call made to the FAA. I know it might be reaching
conspiracy around the White House. I mean,
I just think it's a little too early to jump back into Boeing right now. 302 is your level, though, to watch on the downside. That's the one that it held recently.
Because it was 320, wasn't it?
Well,
and then we broke below that,
it was 320,
and now we're holding at 323.
294 was the level that you had to hold, and we stopped short of that at 302. recently this week. So that's the new level to watch in case you get this little bounce, starts to be a little longer lived on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Watch that level. It's no longer the 294, because if we break the 302, 294 doesn't have the same relevance that it did before this.
I think the technicals have been very important in the stock, as we've talked about. It actually was outperforming during periods. It was hard to explain why the stock was holding a range. The things that brought it through that bottom end of that range, and Steve outlined that all well. All the news over the last 2 weeks has all been about sentiment. It hasn't been anything specific related to the balance sheet. It's been basically the company getting out there themselves saying things that sound exceedingly penitent, obviously getting the kind of positive response from the FAA we got today. So United talking about doing damage control for themselves was a driver down for the stock, saying they're not going to fly it through at least the summer. Of course they're going to tell you that. So in other words, everyone is doing damage control. To me, the headlines are as they should be, which is that the FAA, we didn't expect this, but the FAA can't look prejudiced against them either. I think David Calhoun, I think Larry Kellner, who's got a great relationship with the airline industry, have done everything right since being put in these roles. And while the numbers around Boeing's earnings aren't going to be great, and we know they're going to borrow some more money. This is Boeing, folks, at a time when interest rates are almost zero. Their wide-body deliveries, by the way, 4Q that just came out 2 weeks ago, were better than expected. So one more 737, two more 767s. I think this is really just a mix. It's actually margin positive for the company.
Karen, what do you think of this? I mean, Calhoun was talking earlier this week with journalists, trying to sort of assuage fears where he could, give all the information he's able to give. Now maybe there's some positive movement from the FAA.
Right.
That seems positive.
It definitely is positive. I think the best thing that can happen for Boeing is certainty. It almost doesn't matter when it is, right? If they just had a date certain, I think that would be the ultimate catalyst. Now, look, this is a really big turnaround today. $14 maybe from low to high. That's a really big move. So you can see why people are optimistic about the FAA. It used to be Boeing would be in charge of the commentary, and then clearly that didn't work out well at all. So I think they should as Tim was saying, they were doing a much better job just either saying nothing or
what was
being
the upside, though, to the FAA even speaking today? Why not just leave it?
Why put themselves in a box in any way? I don't know.
Because now you set it up for, as quick as the stock went up, for there to be pressure on it if, for whatever reason, the FAA steps back off that statement, or if it takes a little bit longer along the process. I didn't think there was any reason for the FAA
But maybe
to
the FAA doesn't care where the stock trades. All they care about,
but it's
all they care about
what's
is
the point? If we're looking at mid-year, why say there's a possibility it could be earlier?
Maybe they really
mid-year?
think it's earlier.
Because the FAA,
I don't know.
The FAA is speaking to the airlines. The FAA is talking to leaders in the industry, trying to give them some guidance of where they are at.
Didn't they know that it was mid? But what I'm saying is that didn't they know? They were speaking to them last week. So what was the upside?
A lot of the airline CEOs this week were pretty frustrated, it seemed like, with what was happening, at least in the interviews that LeBeau was doing and how they were expressing themselves on those earnings calls. So maybe not. Maybe they needed that certainty.
I think I totally agree with all of that. Although Southwest CEO was on the network yesterday, and he said David Calhoun is the right man for the job. I mean, they said we're going to entertain competitive offers and obviously have to do what's best for our shareholders and what's best for our customers. But I think the airlines don't have a lot of choice, but I think Boeing has done everything that they can do since this crisis turned into a change of C-suite, not necessarily from the outset of the crisis, to begin to reverse the sentiment tied against them.